Professor Xirath's sixth manipulator trembled as he queued up the next file in the xenobiology curriculum. The lecture hall fell silent, that particular kind of anticipatory silence that precedes revelation. 53 students from a dozen different species leaned forward in their adaptive seating, sensory organs focused on the holographic display. Today, Xirath announced, his translator rendering his clicks and whistles into standard galactic. We examine Earth. Catalog number 3 to 7821. Class M Death World. A collective shudder rippled through the classroom. Everyone had heard rumors about Earth, the planet where evolution had apparently decided that mercy was optional and violence was curriculum. The hologram flickered to life, displaying a blue-green sphere that looked deceptively peaceful from orbit. Xirath's chromatophores darkened to a warning hue as he began the presentation. Earth possesses more apex predators per square kilometer than any other inhabited world in the galactic community. Not just one or two dominant species, but hundreds, thousands if we count the smaller classifications. A Viserian student, their wing flaps twitching nervously, raised a tentacle. Professor, surely that's an exaggeration? How could a single planet support so many apex predators without them eliminating each other? An excellent question, Clivex. The answer is both simple and terrifying. Earth's apex predators exist in a state of constant competition. They don't eliminate each other because they're too busy perfecting the art of killing everything else. Xirath manipulated the controls, and the hologram zoomed into a dense jungle. Let me show you what I mean. The first creature materialized in the center of the room. A tiger, its muscles rippling beneath orange and black stripes. The hologram was so detailed that several students instinctively retreated. The tiger moved with fluid grace, each step calculated, predatory. Its amber eyes seemed to track the students despite being nothing more than light and pixels. This is what Earth classifies as an apex predator, Xirath continued. Note the binocular forward-facing vision, a trait shared by nearly all of Earth's hunters. The retractable claws, capable of shredding Kevlar-equivalent materials. Jaw strength exceeding 400 kilograms per square centimeter. This creature can take down prey 3 times its own body mass. Aurelian students' throat sac inflated with anxiety. And humans? They share this planet with these creatures? Share. Xirath's translator almost failed to convey his bitter amusement. The humans hunted these creatures to near extinction. For sport. Not for food. Not for territory. For entertainment. The classroom erupted in horrified chittering and whistling. Xirath allowed it for a moment before continuing. But the tiger is merely an introduction. Let me show you something more impressive. The hologram shifted. Now a great white shark materialized, suspended in a simulation of ocean water. Its rows of teeth gleamed like industrial cutting tools. Its dead eyes held no emotion, no mercy, just the cold calculation of a perfectly evolved killing machine. This apex predator has remained virtually unchanged for over 400 million years, Xirath explained. It needs no improvements. It is perfect death, wrapped in muscle and prehistoric fury. Its bite force exceeds 1,800 kilograms. It can detect electrical impulses from a dying heart half a kilometer away. It can smell a single drop of blood in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. A small chirp came from the back row. And humans? They swim in the same water as these things? Swim with them, Xirath corrected. Humans have developed an entire industry around getting into metal cages and lowering themselves into water filled with these apex predators. Again, for entertainment. The professor cycled through more examples. Saltwater crocodiles with jaws that could crush vehicle frames. Polar bears that could decapitate a seal with a single swipe. Komodo dragons with septic mouths that turned every bite into a death sentence. Each revelation brought fresh waves of disbelief from the students. Now, Xirath said, his tone dropping into registers usually reserved for discussing galactic disasters. I need you to understand something crucial. Every creature I've shown you, every single apex predator on Earth, has one thing in common. He paused for effect, letting the tension build. They're all afraid of humans. The classroom exploded with protest. Impossible! The data must be corrupted. No single species could. Silence! Xirath's command echoed through the chamber. The data is verified, cross-referenced, confirmed by the Galactic Census Bureau themselves. Humans are Earth's true apex predator. They've conquered every biome on their planet. They've eliminated or subjugated every species that posed a threat. They've turned a death world into their personal kingdom. The hologram shifted one final time, displaying a human. Simple, bipedal, no natural armor, no claws, no venomous fangs. It looked impossibly fragile compared to everything they'd seen. And tomorrow, Professor Xirath said quietly, one of them arrives at this station. A human xenobiologist has been assigned to our department as part of the cultural exchange program. The classroom had never been quieter. Class dismissed. I suggest you prepare yourselves. The next morning, the entire xenobiology department gathered in the docking bay. Professor Xirath had insisted on being present for the humans' arrival, and where he went, nervous students followed. The observation gallery was packed with dozens of species, all pretending they weren't staring at the empty airlock. I heard humans can see in almost complete darkness, whispered a Thelian student, their eye stalks swiveling nervously. I heard they can run for days without stopping, added another. Pursuit predators. They just follow their prey until it drops dead from exhaustion. My nestmate told me they can eat poison for pleasure. They call it spicy food. Professor Xirath said nothing, but his chromatophores flickered with colors that suggested he'd heard far worse. The truth about humans was somehow both less and more terrifying than the rumors. They weren't invincible juggernauts of destruction. They were simply relentless, adaptable, strategic. They'd climbed to the top of their world's food chain not through superior strength, but through superior thinking. That, Xirath reflected, was somehow worse. The airlock hissed. Every being in the observation gallery froze. The door opened, and the human stepped through. He was tall by most species standards, roughly 1.8 meters. His skin was a medium brown, his hair dark and short. He wore what appeared to be standard-issue station clothing, adapted for human physiology. He carried a single duffel bag over his shoulder. His eyes, those forward-facing predator eyes, swept the docking bay with the kind of casual awareness that spoke of constant environmental assessment. And beside him, connected by a simple tether, walked a dog. The creature was large, perhaps 35 kilograms of muscle and fur. Its coat was a mixture of browns and blacks, thick and healthy. Its tongue lolled out in what humans apparently considered an expression of happiness, but which looked to most of the observers like a display of teeth. The dog's ears swiveled constantly, tracking sounds. Its nose twitched, sampling the station's recycled air. One of the Viserian students fainted. Professor Xirath forced himself down to the docking bay floor, approaching slowly with his manipulators held in the universal gesture of peaceful greeting. Welcome to Research Station Kepler 442. I am Professor Xirath, head of xenobiology. You must be Doctor. Call me Jake, the human said, his voice surprisingly gentle. He extended his hand, that strange human gesture of pressing flesh together to indicate friendly intent. Xirath managed to wrap a manipulator around it briefly. The human's grip was firm but not crushing. Controlled. Jake Morrison. And this, he gestured to the dog, is Apollo. That's you brought. Xirath's translator struggled with his sudden loss of coherent speech. That's an apex predator. Apollo? Nah, he's a sweetheart. Jake reached down and scratched behind the dog's ears. The creature's tail began to wag, a motion that looked like a weaponized club to most of the observers. German Shepherd mix. Best friend I've ever had. Dr. Morrison, Xirath said carefully, trying to keep his chromatophores from betraying his anxiety. We studied Earth's fauna extensively. Canis lupus familiaris. Descended from wolves. Pack hunters. Bite force of over 230 kilograms per square centimeter. Capable of running at speeds exceeding 40 kilometers per hour. They've been known to bring down prey much larger than themselves through coordinated attacks. Yeah, That all sounds about right, Jake agreed cheerfully. Apollo's pretty fast when he wants to be. Aren't you, boy? The dog's tail wagged harder. But he's also great at fetch, loves belly rubs, and has never met a tennis ball he didn't want to destroy. Xirath realized his translator was rendering the human's words correctly, but the meaning wasn't computing. You keep it as a companion? As a pet? Well, yeah. Dogs have been humanity's companions for over 30,000 years. Longer, maybe the archaeology's still being debated. We evolved together in a way. They helped us hunt. We gave them food and shelter. Best partnership in Earth's history. The observation gallery had gone completely silent. 53 students were processing the same impossible information. The apex predator that had terrified them in yesterday's lecture wasn't just on their station. It was being kept, willingly, by an even more dangerous apex predator who considered it a friend. Jake seemed to notice the attention for the first time. He looked up at the gallery and waved. Hey there. Looking forward to working with all of you. Apollo's very friendly, by the way. If anyone wants to meet him, just let me know. He loves new people. The dog, Apollo, sat down beside Jake's leg and panted happily, completely oblivious to the fact that he'd just shattered the worldview of an entire classroom of xenobiology students. Professor Xirath's chromatophores had turned a color he didn't even know he could produce. This, he thought, was going to be a very long semester. Over the next 3 weeks, Apollo became an unofficial mascot of Research Station Kepler 442, and a source of constant, nerve-wracking fascination. Jake had set up his quarters in the xenobiology wing, and Apollo went with him everywhere. Everywhere. The first incident occurred in the main laboratory. Professor Xirath was demonstrating the proper technique for collecting samples from bioluminescent fungi when Apollo trotted in, his claws clicking on the deck plating. Half the class immediately evacuated to the far side of the room. Sorry, Jake called from the doorway. He slipped past me. Apollo, here boy. But Apollo had discovered something far more interesting than his human companion. A Rillian student named Vishk had been eating his lunch, a collection of nutrient pellets that apparently smelled absolutely fascinating to Earth's apex predator. The dog approached, nose working overtime, tail in full wag mode. Vishk's throat sac inflated to 3 times its normal size. It's going to eat me, he whispered, frozen in terror. I'm being hunted. This is how I die. Apollo sat down in front of Vishk, stared at the nutrient pellets, and let out a soft whine. He just wants to try your food, Jake explained, walking over calmly. Apollo, no begging. We talked about this. He looked at Vishk. Sorry about that. He's not picky about his diet. One time he ate an entire stick of butter off the counter. Threw up on my favorite rug. Don't let him fool you with those eyes. Those eyes, large, brown, and utterly focused on Vishk's lunch, didn't look manipulative. They looked predatory. At least that's what Vishk would later tell anyone who'd listen. I can give him one. Vishk ventured, his voice trembling. Better not. Xenonutrition protocols. Don't want to make him sick. Jake snapped his fingers, and Apollo immediately trotted to his side. Good boy. The class watched this exchange with the kind of attention usually reserved for diffusing antimatter containment fields. The apex predator had obeyed a simple sound. No threat display, no dominance fight, just compliance. How? Professor Xirath asked slowly. Do you command it? Command. Jake looked puzzled. I don't command Apollo. We communicate. I taught him signals and he understands them. In return, I understand what he needs. When he's hungry, tired, wants to play. It's a relationship, not a dictatorship. But you're the apex predator, a student blurted out. You're supposed to dominate all other species. Jake's expression shifted into something complicated, part amusement, part sadness. That's a pretty grim view of humanity. Yeah, we're good at surviving. Great at it, actually. But that's not all we are. We're also good at making friends. The second incident was worse. Station Commander Zrel 9, a Kinthari with 4 arms and a reputation for unshakable calm, made a surprise inspection of the xenobiology wing. Apollo, who'd been sleeping under Jake's desk, woke up, and immediately went into what Jake called alert mode. To everyone else, it looked like attack mode. Apollo's ears came forward. His posture shifted, muscles tensing. His tail stopped wagging and held straight out. And then he did something that caused 3 separate species to trigger their emergency evacuation protocols. He barked. The sound echoed through the metal corridors like weapons fire. Deep, loud, aggressive. It was the sound of an apex predator announcing its territory, warning off intruders, preparing for violence. Commander Xirath 9 stopped mid-step. His translator was sophisticated enough to analyze the vocalization and provide context. Warning signal, territorial defense, threat assessment. Hi. Apollo, stand down. Jake's voice cut through the chaos. Not loud but firm. It's okay, boy. Friend. Apollo barked twice more, then looked at Jake, then back at the commander. His tail gave a tentative wag. After a long moment, he sat down, though his attention never left the newcomer. My apologies, Commander, Jake said, walking over to stand beside his dog. Apollo's trained to be protective. He didn't recognize you. That creature would have attacked me to protect you? Xirath 9's translator conveyed what might have been awe or horror. Possibly both. Maybe, probably just bark a lot and look scary. He's never actually bitten anyone. Jake scratched Apollo's head. But yeah, that's kind of the point. Dogs are pack animals. I'm his pack. He looks out for me. I look out for him. An apex predator, Xirath 9 said slowly, voluntarily protects another apex predator. Not for food. Not for breeding rights, but for friendship. Exactly. By the 4th week, word had spread throughout the entire station. Humans didn't just survive a death world full of apex predators. They'd convinced at least one species of apex predator to join them, to live with them, to love them, and somehow that was more terrifying than anything in Professor Xirath's lectures. Because if humans could befriend Earth's monsters, what else were they capable of? The crisis began at 0300 station time with an alarm that sent everyone scrambling from their sleep cycles. Hull breach. Section 7 Delta. Life support compromised. All personnel evacuate to emergency shelters. Jake was in his quarters when the alarm sounded, and his training from the Interstellar Exchange Corps kicked in immediately. He grabbed his emergency kit, sealed his environmental suit, and reached for Apollo's specially designed canine suit, a gift from Earth's xenobiological outreach program that had cost more than his first apartment. Getting a panicking dog into a pressure suit was never fun. Getting one into a pressure suit while the station shook from secondary explosions was a nightmare. Come on, buddy. I know you hate this, Jake muttered, wrestling Apollo's front legs through the suit's openings. The dog whined, his ears flat against his skull. I know, but we gotta do this. Work with me here. Apollo, to his credit, seemed to understand the urgency. He held still long enough for Jake to seal the suit, check the oxygen supply, and activate the temperature controls. Through his suit's heads-up display, Jake could see Apollo's vital signs. Elevated heart rate, but stable. They made it to the corridor just as Professor Xirath stumbled past, 3 of his manipulators clutching emergency supplies while the others worked to seal his own environmental suit. Dr. Morrison, thank the void you're alive. We need to. Xirath stopped, his chromatophores flashing distress colors. There are students trapped in Lab 7. It's adjacent to the breach. They can't get out, the blast doors sealed them in, but the backup life support isn't functioning. They have maybe 20 minutes of air. Where's the emergency response team? Responding to the breach site. They can't get to the lab in time. The route is blocked by debris. Xirath's translator rendered his clicks and whistles as pure despair. We're going to lose them. Jake's mind raced. Lab 7. He'd been there yesterday. Small space, 1 main entrance, but there was a maintenance crawlway, too small for most species, but humans were surprisingly flexible. He'd used similar crawlways on Europa Station during his training. I can get through the maintenance access, Jake said. Guide them out. You. Xirath's chromatophores flickered with confusion. Dr. Morrison, you're a scientist, not a rescue specialist. And that crawlway, it's barely 60 centimeters high. The structural integrity is unknown. You could be trapped, crushed. Apollo barked. Even through the suit, the sound was loud and insistent. Jake looked down at his dog. Apollo's tail was wagging despite the fear scent that must be flooding the corridor. His eyes, visible through the suit's transparent face panel, held that absolute trust that dogs seem to specialize in. The trust that said, "I'm with you, wherever you're going." "Make that we can get through," Jake corrected. "Apollo's search and rescue trained." "Well, partially. We did a weekend course once." "Close enough. You're going to bring the apex predator?" Xirath's translator nearly broke trying to convey his incredulity. "Damn right I am." 10 minutes later, Jake was crawling through a maintenance tunnel that had apparently been designed by and for species without spines. Behind him, Apollo scrambled and wiggled through the narrow space, his panting loud in Jake's helmet speakers. "Okay, boy," Jake muttered, mostly to himself, "just like that weekend course. You remember? Find the people, bring them home." Apollo's tail thumped against the tunnel wall. The crawlway opened into Lab 7 through a maintenance hatch. Jake could see 3 students huddled in the corner, 2 Viserians and a Thelian. Their environmental suits were running on emergency power, oxygen counters blinking red. "Hey!" Jake called out, pushing through the hatch. "Rescue party's here. We're getting you out." The Thelian, a student named Clivex, stared at Jake with all 6 of his eye stalks. "You came back for us? But you're human, yeah. Come on, we don't have time for the whole scary apex predator discussion. Can you move?" One of the Viserians was unconscious, her wing flaps singed from the initial explosion. Jake did a quick assessment, alive, but couldn't navigate the crawlway on her own. This was going to be complicated. "Apollo, come." The dog scrambled through the hatch, immediately moving to sniff each of the students. Jake grabbed the emergency medical kit from the wall and began stabilizing the injured Viserian. "Okay, here's what we're doing. Clivex, you're going first. Follow the tunnel, take a right at the junction, it'll bring you to Section 8. The rescue team is there." "What about Silvix?" Clivex gestured to the unconscious Viserian. "I'll carry her, but I need someone to guide me through, and my hands will be full." Jake looked at Apollo. The dog looked back, his expression, as much as a dog in an environmental suit could have one, serious, almost understanding. "Apollo, find way home." The dog's ears perked up at the command sequence. Jake had taught him those words during their search and rescue weekend. Apollo had found Jake's hidden jacket every time. This wasn't that different, right? Just a maintenance tunnel instead of a forest, with potentially compromised structural integrity and a ticking oxygen clock. No pressure. Apollo led them through the maintenance tunnels like he'd designed them himself. His nose pressed against the floor of the cramped space, following what Jake hoped was the scent trail they'd left on the way in. Behind them, Jake dragged the unconscious Viserian as gently as the narrow space allowed, while Clivex brought up the rear, his breathing sharp with fear in the comm channel. "Left turn coming up," Jake warned, watching Apollo's body language. The dog's tail was no longer wagging, his full attention focused on the task. This was working mode. The same intensity his wolf ancestors had used when bringing down prey was now being used to save lives. They emerged into Section 8 to find Professor Xirath and the emergency response team waiting. The medical personnel immediately took charge of Silvix, rushing her to the medbay. Clivex collapsed against the wall, his eye stalks drooping with exhaustion and relief. Jake unsealed his helmet and immediately knelt to remove Apollo's suit. The dog emerged panting heavily, his fur matted with sweat. He looked up at Jake with an expression that clearly said, "Can we please never do that again?" "Good boy," Jake whispered, scratching behind Apollo's ears. "Such a good boy. You saved them." Apollo's tail gave a tired wag. "That was..." Xirath began, his chromatophores cycling through colors Jake had learned to interpret as profound confusion. "That apex predator just saved my students' lives." "That apex predator has a name," Jake said, a bit more sharply than he intended. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving him shaky and exhausted. And yeah, he did. That's what dogs do. They help their pack. Over the next few days, something shifted on Research Station Kepler 442. Students who'd previously given Apollo a wide berth started approaching cautiously, asking if they could pet him. Jake always said yes after checking that Apollo was comfortable. Professor Xirath revised his entire lecture series on Earth's apex predators, adding sections on interspecies cooperation and the domestication process. The injured Viserion, Silvix, recovered fully. Her first request upon leaving the medbay was to meet Apollo properly. Jake brought him to her recovery room. Apollo, sensing the nervous energy, approached slowly and sat down a respectful distance away. His tail wagged gently. He's so. Silvix's wing flaps trembled slightly. He doesn't look as frightening up close. Want to pet him? Jake asked. He loves making new friends. Silvix extended one wing flap tentatively. Apollo's tail wagged harder, but he stayed seated, waiting for permission. She touched his head, feeling the soft fur, the warmth of living muscle beneath. Apollo's eyes closed in contentment. I thought Earth's apex predators were all about hunting and killing, Silvix said quietly. That's what we were taught. They are, Jake agreed. Apollo's ancestors were wolves. They took down elk, moose, even bison. They were efficient, brutal hunters when they needed to be. He scratched Apollo's ears, and the dog leaned into his hand. But they were also social animals. They cared for their pack, raised their young together, mourned their dead. When humans and wolves started working together, we found out we had more in common than we thought. And now we've got dogs. 30,000 years of partnership. They're still apex predators. Apollo could absolutely take down prey if he needed to. But he's also my best friend. He's both things at once. Dangerous and loving. Predator and companion. Silvix continued petting Apollo, her movements becoming more confident. I think I misunderstood humans. When we studied Earth, we only looked at the violence, the competition, the hunting. That's only part of the story, Jake said. Yeah, humans are good at survival. We're strategic, persistent, adaptable. We climbed to the top of our food chain. But we also figured out that we didn't have to do it alone. We made friends with wolves. We domesticated cats, horses, cattle. We built civilizations based on cooperation, not just competition. Professor Xirath had been standing in the doorway, listening. His chromatophores shifted to a color Jake had learned meant thoughtful contemplation. You're saying that humanity's greatest strength isn't your ability to kill. No, Jake agreed. Our greatest strength is our ability to make allies, to turn potential enemies into family, to look at a wolf, something that could hunt us, and see a partner instead of a threat. Apollo chose that moment to yawn, displaying all his impressive teeth, before laying his head on Silvix's lap and falling asleep. The contrast was perfect. Apex predator and gentle companion, all at once. You know what's really interesting? Jake continued. This partnership changed both species. Humans became better hunters, more successful. And wolves became dogs. More social, more expressive, better at reading human emotions. We shaped each other, made each other better. And you think other species could do the same? Xirath asked. Form these kinds of bonds? I think everyone already does in their own way. You're all here on this station, different species working together. Learning from each other. That's what intelligence is really for, not just surviving but connecting. Building something bigger than yourself. The next day, Professor Xirath gave a revised lecture to his xenobiology class. The title had changed, Earth's Apex Predators. A study in adaptation, cooperation, and unexpected friendship. Apollo attended the lecture. By now, his presence barely caused a stir. He slept through most of it, curled up at Jake's feet, occasionally twitching his paws as he dreamed of whatever Earth dogs dream about. When Xirath reached the section about Canis lupus familiaris, he pulled up a new image, not the ferocious hunting wolf from the previous lectures, but a photo Jake had provided. It showed a human child, no more than 5 years old, asleep with her arms wrapped around a large dog. Both looked completely peaceful, completely safe. This, Xirath told his students, is perhaps the most important thing to understand about humanity and their apex predators. They don't just survive together. They love each other. The class sat in silence, processing this information. Finally, Clivex raised a manipulator. "Professor, does this mean humans could theoretically befriend any species? Even those considered dangerous? Based on Earth's history, they've befriended wolves, large cats, bears, horses, even reptiles and birds of prey. Species that could kill them, but chose not to because the partnership was more valuable than the conflict." Another student spoke up. "That's actually more terrifying than the hunting." "How so?" Xirath asked. "Because it means humans don't just conquer. They convert. They turn enemies into allies, predators into protectors. If they could do that with Earth's apex predators, what could they do on a galactic scale?" Jake, listening from the back of the room, smiled slightly. Apollo's tail thumped against his leg, the dog's way of saying he was listening, even while appearing to sleep. Xirath's chromatophores shifted to a color that Jake had learned meant, "You're absolutely right, and that changes everything." "Indeed," the professor said, "which is why we continue to study humanity, not as a threat to be feared, but as a model to be understood. They survived a death world not by becoming more dangerous than everything around them, but by making friends with the danger itself." "That seems impossible," muttered a student. Apollo chose that moment to wake up, yawn widely, and trot over to Professor Xirath. The class tensed, old instincts dying hard. But Apollo simply sat down in front of the professor and offered his paw. Xirath, after a moment's hesitation, wrapped a manipulator around it. Apollo's tail wagged. "Not impossible," Xirath said quietly. "Just improbable. Which, I'm learning, is very different from impossible when humans are involved." After the lecture, several students approached Jake, asking questions about Earth, about dogs, about the domestication process. One asked if humans had ever met a species they couldn't befriend. "Sure," Jake said. "Mosquitoes. Humans have been trying to eliminate them for millennia. Turns out even we have our limits." The students chittered and whistled with what Jake had learned to recognize as laughter. Apollo wagged his tail, sensing the positive energy even if he didn't understand the joke. As they walked back to their quarters that evening, Jake looked down at his companion, the apex predator that billions of years of evolution had crafted into a perfect hunting machine, and that 30,000 years of partnership had transformed into humanity's best friend. "You know what, Apollo? I think we did good here. Showed them that Earth isn't just about being scary. It's about being together." Apollo looked up at him with those expressive brown eyes and barked once. Agreement, as always. In the galactic archives, there's now a new saying: "You can study Earth's predators all you want, but never forget the species that keeps one as a pet, because on Earth, even the monsters have friends." And in the xenobiology wing of Research Station Kepler 442, there's a photograph that gets shared across thousands of star systems. It shows a human scientist, an apex predator from a death world, sitting peacefully in a research lab. Beside him, curled up and fast asleep, is another apex predator, a dog named Apollo. To most of the galaxy, it's a reminder that humanity's greatest strength isn't their ability to survive. It's their ability to convince others to survive with them, to turn competition into cooperation, to transform a wolf into a friend. Because in a universe full of dangers, sometimes the scariest thing isn't the predator. It's the predator that chose love instead of violence, and somehow learned to teach others the same choice.